ನಾವು ಮನುಷ್ಯರು ಮಾಡೋ ತಪ್ಪಿಂದ ಗೊತ್ತುಂಟು ಮಗ. ಅದು ನಾವು ಕೊಟ್ಟದ್ದು, ಅದು ನಮ್ಮದು ಅಂತ ಎನಿಸು. ಆದರೆ ಅದು ಎಲ್ಲಿಂದ ಬಂತು, ಯಾರಿಗೆ ಸೇರಿದ್ದು, ಆ ಸತ್ಯ ಗೊತ್ತಿದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ನೆಮ್ಮದಿಯಿಂದ ಬದುಕಬಹುದು.
Larger-than-life characters exuding uber-masculine attributes with over-the-top action sequences and grand cinematography have always been staple characteristics of the masala genre in Indian cinema, but no industry has quite replicated these codes to commercial success like the Kannada film industry. While the Telugu industry, under the guidance of S.S. Rajamouli, proves to be a worthy contender, what makes the Kannada industry stand out is how its narratives allude to real contemporary problems to personify the development of its central characters. Even with the KGF franchise, gang culture and poverty are central conflicts that catapult its protagonist into a capitalist vendetta and wanting to conquer the world. Likewise, Rishabh Shetty's Kantara heavily relies on the traditionally rooted and mythical performance of Bhutta Kola to tell a tale of greed, destiny, succession, and modernity. But before we start to analyze the themes, characters, and their motivations in Kantara, this is your spoiler alert. Reportedly amassing more than 350 crores at the box office, Kantara has been championed as the regional film with a traditionally rooted story that focused on the strife between forest dwellers and government officials on the encroachment of forest reserves, gradually snowballed into a pan-Indian phenomenon that presented a local story with universal appeal and a larger-than-life aesthetic grandeur. However, despite this commercial success, the film is not devoid of criticism. The originality of the plot and the character development of the protagonist all take seemingly generic approaches, while the twists surrounding the main villain can be seen from a mile away. Occasionally, the film wavers off and transverses multiple genres in true masala fashion, leading to a constant loss of narrative tension, with Shiva's recurring dreams being the only anchor rooting the stakes of the film. So, despite the raw, violent, and generic plot, was the film's technically brilliant representation and injection of cultural mythology what made Kantara stand out from its contemporaries? How has Kantara, a regional film with a specific dialect, appealed to such a wider audience? And what does it tell about the wider sensibility of the Indian audience? While popular media demarcates Kantara as an action thriller, the film reiterates the codes of a proper masala movie. It opens with a monologue explaining 3 timelines of generational wealth and folk legend: 1847, 1970, and 1990. A king respected and beloved by his subjects with all forms of material wealth and familial relations is unsatisfied and devoid of peace. Upon embarking on a journey to seek mental peace, he eventually comes across the totem stone of Panjurli, the demigod and protector of the Kadabetu forest. Realizing the presence of the totem provides him with a sense of peace, and he proceeds to take the totem to his kingdom after agreeing with Panjurli that he would donate the land to the residents of the forest. Panjurli further warns the king that if he errs on his promise, his compatriot, Guliga, would seek revenge if any injustice and pain falls on his people on the king's behalf. More than a century later, when the descendant of the king tries to employ the state-sanctioned legal method to reclaim the land donated by his ancestor, he dies on the stairs of the court upon the curse of Panjurli. This is the first supernatural manifestation of Panjurli's powers presented to viewers, and quickly establishes that the story of Kantara isn't normal. Fast forward 20 years, we witness the exploits of Shiva, the son of the Bhutta Kola performer whose curse killed the previous landlord. The central ideologies discussed in the film revolve around the temporality of ownership and the abstract existence of material wealth. These ideas are debated through the dichotomy of tradition versus modernity through a struggle of masculine ego between the 3 central characters, Shiva, Murali, and Devendra Satur, who represent the rural village, state government, and capitalist landlord. All 3 figures represent vastly different classes of ideologies, but are eerily similar in one aspect: their performance of masculinity and its association with power. To reciprocate the alienness that non-Kannadiga viewers are subjected to due to the rootedness of the film, a montage after the introductory credits showcases the Karate Kambala festival. It shows the intricate lifestyles of the residents of Kadabetu, featuring bull racing, cockfighting, alcohol brewing, and gambling, and personifies the tribal life of the community. During this montage, in a burst of energy, we are introduced to the bestial Shiva. Shiva's masculinity is defined right from the get-go. His iconic shout as he starts the race is indicative of a charismatic presence that will nail audiences to their seats. His appearance is rugged with thick hair, a dusty beard, and yellow dentition. His very introduction as a Kambala athlete maneuvering two bulls plowing across a land covered in dirt foregrounds both his bestial physical prowess and his rootedness to the land. A few minutes later, we witness Shiva engaging in a physical brawl in the mud, where he easily subdues 6 or 7 people. In every other fight scene, Shiva is shown to have an extra surge of energy once he is covered in dirt or mud, almost as if there's an invisible connection between him and the land he is destined to protect. Shiva adopts the character arc of the chosen hero fleeing from his destiny as he refuses to take up the mantle of the Bhuta Kola performer upon the disappearance of his father, and lets his cousin Garuva take up the position. He leisurely spends his days drinking, smoking, hunting animals, and ogling at women with his compatriots Rampa and Bula, with no sense of duty. He is impulsive, easily provoked, reactionary, and boasts a huge ego. He hopes to live a laid-back, comfortable life serving the landlord Devendra Satur. Contrary to Shiva, the deputy range forest officer Murali is calm and collected. Antithetical in physical appearance to Shiva, he's clean-shaven. He recognizes that converting Kadubetsu into a forest reserve on behalf of the government is no menial task when tracking the record of his predecessors, and is therefore willing to resort to violent measures. This eventually results in him logging horns with Shiva, and his character arc shifts from being just a DRFO to wanting to imprison Shiva and establish himself as the dominant power of the forest. Murali symbolizes an urban existence. Being a DRFO, he most likely was educated in an urban social milieu. His possession of a jeep and handgun all exude a higher class existence, something that Shiva aspires for. These underlying themes also fuel their rivalry. While the film puts special emphasis on the ancestral ascendance of land and the power that is transferred thereby, Murali is the only character who refuses such transferred or privileged power distribution, as he earned the position of DRFO through merit and believes in earning one's position as visible from his hostility towards Leela.
ಹೊಸ ಅಪಾಯಿಂಟ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಲೀಲಾ ಅಂತ
ಸರ್
ಇನ್ಫ್ಲುಯೆನ್ಸರ್ ಕೆಲಸ ತಗೊಂಡವರು ಏನ್ರಿ ಯೂನಿಫಾರ್ಮ್ಗೆ ಇಸ್ತ್ರಿ ಹಾಕ್ತಾ ಟೈಮ್ ಆಯ್ತಾ?
While Satur being the antagonist can be evidently predicted early on, Shetty does a good job of camouflaging this fact through the altercations between Shiva and Murali. For most of the story, while Satur is present on screen, his presence is overshadowed by the rural versus state narrative that occupies the first half of the film. He represents a capitalist sensibility and prides himself on his ancestral inheritance.
ನಮ್ಮ ಕುಟುಂಬಕ್ಕೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಪಟ್ಟದ್ದು ಸುಮಾರು ಜಾಗ ಉಂಟು. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಈಗ ನಿಮ್ಮ ಕಾಡಬೆಟ್ಟಿಂದ ಅಲ್ಲಿಯವರೆಗೆ ಆ ಗುಡ್ಡೆ ಕಾಣ್ತಾ ಉಂಟಲ್ಲ, ಒಂದು 500 ಎಕರೆ ಉಂಟು ನನ್ನ ಜಾಗ.
He is hostile to allowing the villagers of Kadubetsu to reside in the forest he believes truly belongs to his family, but recognizes that it would be much easier to trick the uneducated residents into donating the land back. Unlike Shiva, whose masculinity is defined by his physical prowess, and Murali, whose masculinity is characterized by the power decreed upon him by the government, Satur lacks both, and therefore exercises his wealth to hire goons and a lawyer to make up for these deficiencies. He uses alcohol and wealth to control Shiva and coerce him into trusting him as well. For all three figures, the land of Kadubetsu symbolizes different things. For Shiva, it's his ancestral home. Even though he does not adorn the attire of the Bhuta Kola performer to become Guliga Daiva and protect the land, he rebukes anyone who tries to confiscate or reorganize the land. Therefore, when Murali and the other police officers overpower him with guns and brute strength and plow through the land to create boundaries, Shiva's identification as the protector is defeated and his ego is hurt. Later on, He lashes out his frustration at Leela for carrying out her responsibilities as a forest officer, and further tries to bury the pathway dug by the police officers, an action symbolic of him trying to fill the void of his own hurt ego. Shiva sees the police officers as infiltrators of his land. Subsequently, Murali recognizes himself as the guardian and the protector of the forest, and a representative of the state government which enforces the law of the land. Accordingly, he is skeptical about the Panjurli Daiva or Guliga, and further shows hostility towards the Kadabetsu inhabitants for poaching and encroaching. It is ultimately the capitalist landlord Devendra Satur who sees the land as purely a money-minting commodity, with little to no emotional value attached to it, except the animosity he feels for the Kadabetsu residents residing on the land he believes to be his.
ನಿಂದ ಬದುಕಿದ್ರೆ ನಾಳೆಗೆ ಇವು ಜಾಗ ಕೇಳ್ತಾವೆ.
While he was able to use his wealth to procure manpower and legal assistance, he was unable to convince Garuva to rewrite the land for himself. Throughout the narrative, Satur pretended to care, but kept a very obvious distance from the villagers and used Shiva as a pillar of trust and a bargaining chip. Whenever Shiva and his companions drink or dine with him, Satur is always seated in a higher position and drinks from a glass cup, while Shiva is seated below and drinks from a copper cup. Before Satur arrives with his men to kill the inhabitants of the village, the lights go out. Such instances symbolize his power over modern machinery and how he wields such forms of modernity against the village dwellers. The firearms Devendra uses are another symbol of his championing his modern self. Ultimately, it was the unison between the residents of Kadabetsu and police officials that had to end the hegemonic control of the capitalist monarch Devendra. The guns of the police officials and the sticks and spears of the villagers come together in the fight to reclaim the homeland. The myth of Guliga, which was dismissed by both Murali and Satur, eventually turns out to be real, as Shiva is possessed by Guliga's spirit. He performs superhuman feats of aggression to single-handedly turn the tide of the battle in favor of the villagers, and ultimately kill Devendra Satur. So what do these instances have in common with other pan-Indian success stories? Similar to Pushpa the Rise, KGF2, and RRR, Kantara too tells the story of an angry Indian man who is capable of overpowering multiple opponents to re-establish control over his homeland and single-handedly protect his people against stately institutions of power. Contrary to these films, Kantara is able to justify the superhuman capabilities of its protagonist by channeling the ambiguity surrounding the mythological figures of Panjurli and Guliga through its main character, and by delving into the mysticism and the mythological ethos of its narrative world and characters.